Hello everyone and welcome to the sixth session of Estelore, in which we will be discussing chapter 3 of Quenta Silmarillion, the history of the Silmarils. Before we begin, in last week session, Michi, you asked about the seven dwarf lords and if there were seven dwarf lordesses as well or not. Um, so here's what the Tolkien professor Coriolson told me when I asked him that. He said, so Aule only made the seven dwarfs because he just wanted things to teach, and he only made the males of that race. And then Eru came, and we went through how he gave them life, the Fea, the soul, and then he put them back to sleep until the children of Ilúvatar, the firstborn, are awake. So at that point, it were only seven dwarves. He said after the children awake, Aule goes back with the help of Ilúvatar, makes the seven companions for those seven dwarves.
Okay.
And so their race continues. So when Ilúvatar adopts them and puts them back to sleep until the children awake, in that time they make the Aule and with Ilúvatar's guidance this time makes the seven soulful with Fea and Roa companions for those seven lords of the dwarves. So that was his answer, which was and he was really about our version of how we read it, and that Aule, like Ilúvatar forgave Aule immediately and then just gave them the life, and then put his attention towards it, that he was about to destroy people or beings with life or Fea in them. He said that that is the correct reading of it, because Aule himself cannot give anyone Fea, cannot give anyone soul. He can only create the bodies, but not souls. The soul power remains alone with Ilúvatar, which was really interesting. Okay, now let's go to chapter 3 of the coming of the Elves and the captivity of Melkor. Through long ages the Valar dwelt in the bliss in the light of the trees, beyond the mountains of Aman, but all the Middle-earth lay in a twilight under the stars, while the lamps had shone, growth began there, which now was checked, because all was again dark, but already the oldest things had arisen. In the seas, in the seas the great weeds, and on earth the shadow of great trees, and in the valley of night-clad hills there were dark creatures, old and strong. To those lands and forests the Valar seldom came, save only Yavanna and Orome, and Yavanna would walk there in the shadows, grieving because the growth and promised spring of Arda was stayed. Um, Spring was stayed, and she set sleep upon many things that had arisen in the spring, so that they should not age, but should wait for a time of awakening that yet should be. But in the north Melkor built his strength, and he slept not, but watched and labored, and the evil things that he had perverted walked abroad, and the dark and slumbering woods were haunted by monsters and shapes of dread. And in Autumnu he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame, Balrogs they were named in Middle-earth in later days, and in that and in that dark time Melkor bred many other monsters of diverse shapes and kinds that long troubled the world, and his realm spread now ever southwards over Middle-earth. Um, so Before, when the Valar were in Middle-earth and had made the two lamps and began the spring of Arda, as we were told in the last chapter, things started to grow with light, but when Melkor destroyed the light, those two lamps, and Illuin and I forget the name of the second one. But when he destroyed the two lamps, the growth stopped, and out of all the Valars, only Orome, who's the hunter, and Yavanna, who's in love and loves all things that grow, still came to Middle-earth. Orome, as we found out last week, really liked hunting fell creatures, and they would run away from him, and he would blow his horn, which even Melkor could hear in his fortress, while Yavanna would tend to the creatures and would put them back to sleep and try to preserve her creation so that they don't age or endure in darkness. Because with the lamps destroyed, although Valinor still has the trees, the two trees, on the other hand, Middle-earth is in complete darkness, save only the stars that Varda made. While Melkor, on the other hand, was still building his army of monsters and perverted Maiar. The Balrogs were one of them. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went up before them. Pretty accurate depiction in the Peter Jackson movies of the Balrogs, cloaked in shadow and fire. And he also kept growing his kingdom, his realm, and remember in the beginning he had claimed Arda for himself, and now he's implementing it. His kingdom and his realm keeps growing southwards because he's in the northmost part of the world, and he just wants to rule over these lands. With the Valar gone back to Valinor, this is the perfect time to do it. You can get this one.
And Melkor made also a fortress and armory not far from the northwestern shores of the sea, to resist any assault that might come from Aman. That stronghold was commanded by Sauron, lieutenant of Melkor, and it was named Angband. It came to pass that the Valar held council, for they became troubled by the tidings that Yavanna and Orome brought from the outer lands. And Yavanna spoke before the Valar, saying, Ye mighty of Arda, the vision of Iluvatar was brief and soon taken away, so that maybe we cannot guess within a narrow count of days the hour appointed. Yet be sure of this, the hour approaches, and within this age our hope shall be revealed, and the children shall awake. Shall we then leave the lands of their dwelling desolate and full of evil? Shall they wake in darkness while we have light? Shall they call Melkor Lord while Manwë sits upon Taniquetel? And Tulkas cried, Nay, let us make war swiftly. Have we not rested from strife overlong, and is not our strength now renewed? Shall one alone contest with us forever? But at the bidding of Manwë, Mandos spoke, and he said, In this age the children of Iluvatar shall come indeed, but they come not yet. Moreover, it is doomed that the firstborn shall come in the darkness, and shall look first upon the stars. Great light shall be for their waning. To Varda ever shall they call at need.
There's
This
a
last kind of passage was a
yeah.
little bit like confusing for me because I was like, are you when Mandos is speaking, I was wondering if is this more of a premonition or like this is going to come to be, or did they see that? I was a little
Yeah,
confused.
yeah, there is a lot to unpack here. First of all, Melkor has not forgotten about the Valar as he's expanding his kingdom, and for that he's making some preparation, because he knows sooner or later the Valar will come for him again. So he makes another fortress called Angband, and who does he give the command of that fortress to? Sauron. He's the lieutenant of Melkor. He's the one of the fallen Maya, and he's second in command. And he's as evil as Melkor himself. Remember that line from the first part of the book? Sauron was only less evil than his master in that for long he served another and not himself. So So that's really interesting that he Sauron is shown here as powerful, as evil as Melkor himself. And so as Yavanna and Orome were the only two who frequently came to Middle Earth, they were the ones who were seeing all the corruption happening in that land, and they would come back and tell other Valar about all they saw. Um, they still do not know exactly when the firstborn, the elves, are coming, but they know it's soon. And they're all understandably worried what would await the children when they wake up. A dark world full of terror and demons and balrogs and monsters and the Dark Lord Melkor. They're wondering what is their duty here as being the guardians or lords of Arda, while they sit here in the blessed realm in the land of Aman with the light of the two trees. As it says in the passage, shall they walk in darkness while we have light? Shall they call Melkor Lord while Manwe sits upon Taniquetil? That's a that's a really bold statement there by Yavanna, and it's a big burn towards Manwe. Like, you're just chilling here, sitting while Melkor is claiming lordship of Middle Earth and will probably like mess the children of Iluvatar as well, and you're just sitting here upon Taniquetil looking pretty. Um, um, that's a really really nice jab at Manwe. Think she's getting Manwe back for refusing the services of her trees for his eagles last time, as she did offer did offer Manwe if his eagles could rest in the trees of Yavanna, but Manwe refused. Maybe she's getting him back. But Yavanna is making a strong case here. If Valar don't show themselves, then most probably the elves would think of Melkor having the only true power, like a god. And beautiful line there by Tulkas. Tulkas being Tulkas, the wrestler ever eager to fight. Remember, he did not enter Arda at the start. Only when he heard the rumor of the fight going on in the Little Kingdom did he enter Arda and wrestled his way to first victory against Melkor for the Valar. Tulkas wants to fight again. He believes the Valar have rested enough and they have gathered their strength and it is time to fight. About the Mandos part. So remember who Mandos is. Mandos, that line from the previous chapter, he's the doomsman of the Valar. Doomsman meaning, it's an interesting word here and it's used in different ways, not the usual ways. Tolkien uses it always like double meaning the doom. But the last line in the paragraph is he's the doomsman of the Valar, but he pronounces his dooms and his judgments only at the bidding of Manwe. Doom here means in the sense of fate or decision. Mandos knows much of what will happen throughout the history of the world. He knows everything that will happen, most of everything that will happen. But he does not say it. He does not tell what will happen to this person or that person or that. He doesn't say it. He only say it or pronounce his doom or give his fate decision only at the bidding of Manwe. And that's the only reason he speaks here when Manwe bids him to. And Mandos affirms here that yes, the children will come in this age, and that they will indeed be born in darkness, save the light of the stars. And who is the kindler of the stars? Varda. And that is why the elves throughout the history of Middle-earth have prayed and cried to Elbereth, because as Mandos points it out here, to Varda ever shall they call at need, because she was the only one with them even in that dark moment when they will first awake. Then Varda went forth from the council, and she looked out from the height of Taniquetil, and beheld the darkness of Middle-earth beneath the innumerable stars, faint and far, Then she began a great labor, greatest of all the works of the Valar since their coming into Arda. She took the silver dews from the vats of Telperion, and therewith she made new stars, and brighter against the coming of the firstborn. Where, wherefore she whose name out of the deeps of time and labors of Ea was Tintale, the kindler, was called after by the elves Elentari, queen of the stars, Carnel and Luinel, Nennar and Lumbar, Alcarinque and Elemerie. She wrought in that time, and many other of the ancient stars she gathered together, and set as a sign in the heavens of Arda, Vilverin, Telumendel, Soronume, and Anarima, and Menelmacar, with his shining belt, that forebodes the last battle that shall be at the end of days. And high in the north, as a challenge to Melkor, she set the crown of 7 mighty stars, the swing, Valakirka, the sickle of the Valar, and sign of doom. Wow, I butchered only half of those names.
I was like, when I was reading those, I was like, more names upon more names. I'm very happy. I think in the most of the regular editions, don't they have footnotes in the back as far as like references to some of these names, or some of them
Not
appendix?
references. There's pronunciations at the beginning of Silmarillion. There are how to pronounce these words with some things on the top, and how different combination of words go together. Like CI is always kir, so CI is always the hard C, then I. So it's not Vala Sirka or Vala Chirka, it's Vala Kirka. CI will always be key. I did try to learn some of the Elvish pronunciations a little while ago, but abandoned it. I should pick it up again. It'll be fun. So after hearing what Mando said, Varda, who was called Tintali, because Tolkien loves inventing names, which does mean the Star Queen in Quenya. Quenya is one of the main languages of the elves of the first age, and Elbereth is her Sindarin name, which also means Star Queen. Sindarin is the Elvish spoken in later part of the book in Middle Earth usually. So when Legolas or Elrond they usually speak Sindarin, not Quenya. These are the two languages of the elves, Sindarin and Quenya. She goes and starts making a second set of stars. She does it by collecting the light, the silver light that's fallen in dew from the dew that falls from Telperion being the silver tree. These stars are more brighter than the previous ones. This group of stars also includes some prominent constellations that we see in our night sky in our world. Menel Makar, that's Orion, and Valakirka, the sickle of the Valar, that's the Big Dipper, and that's in our sky. So these stars are represented in the Tolkien's world as well, and also these are also in the Lotro sky, night sky. If you go up there, they have put some work into keeping the constellations correct. So you will see the 7 stars there as well in the same constellation. Varda wanted to make sure the elves did not feel abandoned or were lightless, that when they looked up, they would see the light beyond the reach of any corruption or marring of Melkor. The things of Middle-earth he would corrupt, but the stars were beyond his reach, beyond his ability. He could not get to them. He could not corrupt them. They were pure. You get the next one.
It is told that even as Varda ended her labors, and they were long, when first Menel Makar strode up the sky, and the blue fire of Halloween flickered in the mists above the borders of the world, In that hour the children of the earth awoke, the firstborn of Iluvatar. By the starlit mare of Cuivienen, water
Quavianen.
of Quavianen, water of awakening, they rose from the sleep of Iluvatar, and while they dwelt yet silent by Quavianen,
Quavianen.
sorry, Quavianen, there I beheld first of all things the stars of heaven. Therefore they have ever loved the starlight, and have revered Varda Elentari above all the Valar. In the changes of the world, the shapes of lands and of seas have been broken and remade. Rivers have not kept their courses, neither have mountains remained steadfast. And to Cuivenin there is no returning. But it is said among the elves that it lay far off in the east of Middle-earth, and northward, and it was a bay in the inland sea of Helkar, and that sea stood where aforetime the roots of the mountain of Iluin had been before Melkor overthrew it. Many waters flowed down thither from heights in the east, and the first sound that was heard by the elves was the sound of water flowing, and the sound of water falling over stone. Oh, sorry, I'm butchering the name of the birthplace of the elves. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's understandable because no one can get there anymore. So now is the moment finally arrived as the constellations of these bright stars strode up the sky there by the lake Cuivienen, the firstborn of Iluvatar, the children of Earth, as they are called here. The elves finally awake, and before anything else, they behold the stars in the heavens, the stars kindled for them by Varda Elentari, Star Queen, Elbereth Giltoniel. Also remember Iluin. Iluin is the mountain where the lamp was made. It was the lamp in the north. That's where it was put in Iluin. And once Melkor, it's the northern lamp that the Valar set on the tall mountain. And when Melkor broke the lamps and threw them down, a sea of Helkar was formed, and near it is Cuivienen. That's where the elves awake. So of all the sounds, they hear the sound of water flowing first and water falling on stone. I bet that made Ulmo, being ever thoughtful and friend to the children, Ulmo might have had something to do with that, because he's always aware of everything happening in the Middle Earth and has never really left the children of Iluvatar. He's not really mentioned here at all in this text, but might have. All the waters are his, so there's a Sea of Helkar. But this region here is, you can't really find it on the map that we have of the Middle Earth. But it should be somewhere like really off to the east of the map. These places don't even exist anymore. So it's really off to the side, and so they were born in the east. They woke in the east. That lamp used to be in the really east side of the Middle Earth. Long they dwelt in their first home by the water under the stars, and they walked the earth in wonder, and they began to make speech and to give names to all things that they perceived. Themselves they named Quendi, signifying those that speak with voices, for as yet they had met no other living things that spoke or sang. And on a time it chanced that Orome rode eastwards in his hunting, and he turned north by the shores of Helkar, and passed under the shadows of Orokarni, the mountains of the east. Then on a sudden Nahar set up a great neighing, and stood still. And Orome wondered, and sat silent, and it seemed to him that in the quiet of the land under the stars he heard afar off many voices singing. Thus it was that the Valar found at last, as it were by chance, those whom they had so long awaited, and Orome, looking upon the elves, was filled with wonder, as though they were beings sudden and marvellous and unforeseen, for so it shall be, for so it shall ever be with the Valar. From without the world, though all things may be forethought in music or foreshown in vision from afar, to those who enter verily into Ea, each in its time shall be met at unawares as something new and unforetold. Couple of things here. When it says long they dwelt in their first home, it is indeed, we have to think of it as a really, really long time. They first could not speak and then slowly started forming words and communicating, and slowly they started forming, naming things and then developing into it into a language. Quendi is the name that they gave themselves to themselves, and it means those who speak with voices. We'll find out their other names later, but Quendi is what they are originally called by themselves in Quenya. As we know from previous sessions that Orome is one of the two Valar who frequently does come to the Middle-earth to hunt and fight the evil creatures of Melkor. It was in one of these journeys that he finally hears other voices singing. And he's absolutely amazed because we remember that the Valar really, really loved the children of Ilúvatar in the vision they saw, even before meeting them, because they were a creation from the mind of Ilúvatar alone, and the Valar did not have any input or anything to do with their inception. These are the children they have long awaited and prepared the world for, and made everything in it for. Orome, looking upon the elves, was filled with wonder, as though they were beings sudden and marvelous and unforeseen. He's just really, really amazed, and he's in awe. Oh, look at that! Didn't know these existed. They are even more beautiful and more amazing than I thought they would be. They are even talking to themselves. They've even made a language. It's pretty cool and beautiful. You get the next one.
In the beginning, the elder children of Ilúvatar were stronger and greater than they have since become, but not more fair, for though the beauty of the Quendi in the days of their youth was beyond all other beauty that Ilúvatar has caused to be, it has not perished, but lives in the west, and sorrow and wisdom have enriched it. And Orome loved the Quendi and named them in their own tongue Eldar, the people of the stars. But that name was after borne only by those who followed him upon the westward road. Yet many of the Quendi were filled with dread at his coming, and this was the doing of Melkor. For by after knowledge the wise declare that Melkor, ever watchful, was first aware of the wakening of the Quendi, and sent shadows and evil spirits to spy upon them and waylay them. So it came to pass, some years ere the coming of Orome, that if any of the elves strayed far abroad, alone or few together, they would often vanish and never return. And the Quendi said that the hunter had caught them, and they were afraid. And indeed the most ancient songs of the elves, of which echoes are still remembered in the west, tell of the shadow shapes that walked in the hills above Cuivinen and would pass suddenly over the stars, and of the dark rider upon his wild horse that pursued those that wandered to take them and devour them. Now Melkor greatly hated and feared the riding of Orome, and either he sent indeed his dark servants as riders, or he set lying whisperers abroad, for the purpose that the Quendi should shun Orome, if ever they should meet.
Wow, nice passage. Especially the first part is pretty awesome. In the beginning, children of Ilúvatar were stronger and greater than they have since become. So it touches on an important theme in the Tolkien's world, that the elder children were or are the fairest thing that Ilúvatar has ever created. Another important theme of Tolkien's world is the theme of decay and diminishing. That everything is declining, everything is dying, greatness is perishing. Elder children were stronger and greater in the beginning, but it's a downward slope since. Look at the elves in Middle Earth. They faded away with time. Their powers declined. They pass into the west. So that is the theme of Tolkien's work. There were like really great lords in the beginning. Even later, when we'll meet some of the men, they could take on Melkor and even like Sauron themselves. While in the later days, that's not really possible. They can't do that anymore. Something is lost with time. And another very interesting thing is their sorrow and wisdom enriching their beauty. Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Wonder how that works. M Might be in the similar fashion of sorrow and wisdom as Niena cries and weeps, and people gain wisdom from hearing her.
Or maybe they also just gain skill level.
Mm,
They're learning language and they're also learning the sort of complications of that, music, etc. Then they they're not born as expert musicians in the beginning.
yeah, 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 definitely. And then learning to sing, like how that must have been a long process of learning to sing, first forming a language and then singing. Also, they are named Eldar by Orome, but we will find out more about the name Eldar and who exactly qualifies to be called an Eldar a little later. Um, so, because since Melkor remained in Middle-earth, he got word of the awakening of the children, and he implemented his plan to make them afraid and submit to his will, and he started kidnapping some of them. He clearly did not want to come meet them face to face because I think they're still an unknown to him, because much like the Valar did not know anything about the children, so neither did Melkor, because he didn't know what kind of powers what kind of powers Ilúvatar gave to these special creatures, these beings who he called his children. What kind of special power did he give them? So he did not want to risk facing them. So when Orome shows up, the children think that he might be just another shadow that have been haunting them for a while, and uh, they got afraid of him. Thus it was that when Nahar neighed, and Orome indeed came among them, some of the Quendi hid themselves, and some fled and were lost. But those that had courage and stayed perceived swiftly that the great rider was no shape out of darkness, for the light of Aman was in his face, and all the noblest of the elves were drawn towards it. But of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor, little is known of a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pits of Utumnu, or has explored the darkness of the councils of Melkor? Yet this is held true by the wise of Eressëa, that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Utumnu was broken, were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the Orcs, in envy and mockery of the Elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes. For the Orcs had life and multiplied after the manner of the children of Ilúvatar, and naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make since his rebellion in the Ainulindale before the beginning. So say the wise. And deep in their dark hearts the Orcs loathed the master, whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. This it may be, this it may be, this it may be was the vilest deed of Melkor, and the most hateful of to Ilúvatar. Oh wow, this is a loaded one. So Melkor's plan to make the Quendi reject Orome almost worked. Some of them did hide and fled from him, but Melkor most probably didn't realize the impact of the light of Aman that would be on Orome's face, the power that comes from being in the blessed realm of Valinor, and how those who beheld or behold the light of the two trees never lose that light no matter where they go or how far they go. And swiftly the elves perceived that this was no enemy, no servant of the shadow, no evil being, but this was the great rider, Orome, the Vala, and the elves felt drawn towards him. And in yeah, so the next one is pretty interesting. We kind of get like the origin story of the orcs. It's a really important passage. Don't think this part is ever discussed ever again in any of the other texts. It's only here mentioned. It's never in the Lord of the Rings. Because here we get a version of the creation of orcs. So some elves stayed and some fled. Those who fled were caught by Melkor and imprisoned. As we know that Melkor cannot create life of his own and can only corrupt, he cannot create or give Fea to anyone, the soul, but he can still pervert others' work, other people's work. And this is what he does. He does not do what Aule did. Aule created Road and these dwarves, but then repented, and orcs on the other hand were not created by Melkor, and I don't think he can even create Roa anymore. He can't even create bodies anymore. That power is taken away from him, much less Fea. It's not like he could create orcs just in the body form and then just use his will to guide them along. No, that's not what happened. Um, what he does is he perverts and corrupts those elves and makes them into orcs, thus making a mockery of the children of Ilúvatar. And since elves had Fea, had life and soul, so did the orcs, and thus they multiplied, and a new species, a new race was born. Another really important line here is deep in their dark hearts the orcs loathed the master whom they served in fear, the maker only of their misery. So uh, the orcs don't have blind allegiance to Melkor. They still hate. Uh, like you can think of it as like the Golem's relationship with the ring. He loves and hates it at the same time. Here also the orcs do serve him, but they still hate him as well. And it opens these weird, interesting questions about redemption. What do you think about that? Like, can orcs be redeemed?
Well, it wasn't sort of they weren't, they possibly individually, sure, because these original orcs were the ones that were perverted. Anyone after is just the genetic progeny of someone that was
Yeah.
perverted in years past. But then that kind of leads me to believe, do orcs have the same time, like life spans?
Yeah. They
Oh,
have
they do.
I think they have the same lifespans as elves, so they and theoretically they are also immortal. Like I don't know of any orc dying of old age.
So
There is
some
no
of those
mention.
original orcs could have also been these perversions,
Yeah,
etc. So it's just anyone else that was born afterwards.
yeah,
It's just strange because in our world, when there are usually some genetic mutations or perversions, that species is usually um, not able to procreate. Like
yeah.
donkeys, just things like that. But I guess those are different instances.
I think these orcs. Uh, so when we think orcs, usually what comes to mind is the deformed, or like that guy in the Lord of the Rings with his like hand cut or something. But I think that they might be like I think of them more like Azog, you know, the Azog from the
Mhm.
movie
Mhm.
Hobbit movie. Like he
Yeah.
was an orc, but he looked like he had lost an arm, yes, but other than that, he looked like just a enemy, like an evil person with face. Like he had a good height, wasn't short or anything. So I'm thinking these orcs are in the similar fashion. So you just made him evil, is what Melkor did, corrupted him in that way, and just made him into a thing that hates or does his bidding, basically. And yeah, go ahead.
But then there's like the additional thing, which is the later with the Uruk-hai, which also I guess we can get to later because that also
Yeah,
right now
or
more like
Uruk-hai was also in it. It's so yeah, that's an invention of Sauron. Uruk-hais. So like his master, he also can't obviously create and can only corrupt and, well, in that case, improve upon his the creation of his master. Here, Melkor creates orcs, and then Sauron perfects them with Uruk-hai. Okay, you get the next one.
Orome tarried a while among the Quendi, and then swiftly he rode back over land and sea to Valinor, and brought the tidings to Valmar. And he spoke of the shadows that troubled Cuivinen. Then the Valar rejoiced, and yet they were in doubt amid their joy. And they debated long what counsel it were best to take for the guarding of the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor. But Orome returned at once to Middle-earth and abode with the Elves. Manwe sat long in thought upon Tanaquil, and he sought the counsel of Iluvatar. And coming then down to Valmar, he summoned the Valar to the Ring of Doom, and thither came even Ulmo from the outer sea. Then Manwe said to the Valar, "This is the counsel of Iluvatar in my heart, that we should take up against the mastery of Arda at whatsoever cost, and deliver the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor." Then Tulkas was glad, but Aule was grieved, foreboding the hurts of the world that must come of that strife. But the Valar made ready and came forth from Aman in strength of war, resolving to assault the fortresses of Melkor and make an end. Never did Melkor forget that this war was made for the sake of the Elves, and that they were the cause of his downfall. Yet they had no part in those deeds, and they know little of the riding of the might of the West against the North in the beginning of their days.
Wow. Uh, so Orome learned about what has been happening, and about these shadows haunting the elves, and he goes back to Valinor to tell the other Valar. Obviously, they were all rejoiced and happy to learn that finally the hour has come for which they had been waiting for so long, but also they were in doubt because they did not know what course of action would be the best. They clearly could not leave the Quendi to fend for themselves against Melkor and his army of fallen Maiar. Something had to be done, but while the Valar were trying to make a decision about what to do, Orome does not stay in Valinor and goes back to live with the elves to protect them from the shadow of Melkor, which is really awesome. Um, Manwë pretty much dials up the big guy above and seeks his counsel, and goes back to Taniquetil and seeks the counsel of Iluvatar. And once he gets it, he finally calls all the Valar to the Ring of Doom, and even Ulmo, who we know does not like to coming to the meetings and is often just chilling at the bottom of oceans and tending to the waters of Middle Earth. Even he comes to this meeting, And this is time for war. The children are awake, and the Valar simply cannot wait any longer. They cannot let Melkor pervert all the children of Ilúvatar. Um, what else we see here in this passage? Um, Obviously, Tulkas, being Tulkas, is glad that he'll get to wrestle again. Um, but it's interesting seeing how Aule is feeling. We saw that whenever a living thing is harmed, Yavanna feels its pain and is not happy, and all the debate in the last chapter about the protectors of the forests and trees, the ants, and everything. In similar manner, Aule, who built mountains and paths and all non-living things, he also feels pain when, in the similar manner to Yavanna, he knows that after the fight, much of his work would be destroyed. All the mountains he builds and everything else he built, well, much of it will be destroyed, and he's feeling pain of the destruction of his creation as well here, which is really interesting, and goes in the same manner, similar to his wife was feeling last week. Melkor met the onset of the Valar in the northwest of Middle-earth, and all that region was much broken. But the first victory of the hosts of the west was swift, and the servants of Melkor fled before them to Utumnu. Then the Valar passed over Middle-earth, and they set a guard over Cuiviénen. And thereafter the Quendi knew nothing of the great battle of the powers, save that the earth shook and groaned beneath them, and the waters were moved, and in the north there were lights as of mighty fires. Long and grievous was the siege of Utumnu, and many battles were fought before its gates, of which naught but the rumour is known to the Elves. In that time the shape of Middle-earth was changed, and the great sea that sundered it from Aman grew wide and deep, and it broke in upon the coast, and made a deep gulf to the southward. Many lesser bays were made between the great gulf and Helcaraxe, far in the north, where Middle-earth and Aman came nigh together. Of these the Bay of Belar was the chief, and into it the mighty river Sirion flowed down from the new raised highland northwards, Dorthonion, and the mountains about Hithlum, the lands of the deep, and its pits were filled with fires, and with great hosts of the servants of Melkor. But at the last the gates of Utumno were broken, and the halls unroofed, and Melkor took refuge in the uttermost pit. Then Tulkas stood forth as champion of the Valar, and wrestled with him, and cast him upon his face, and he was bound with chain Angainor, that Aule had wrought, and led captive, and the world had peace for a long age. Wow, you get the big fight here. So this is the second big fight between Melkor and his forces versus the Valar and their forces. The Valar, being ever so careful, protected and shielded Cuiviénen, where the Elves were, so that during this mega global superpower conflict, the Elves don't get harmed. The only parallel to this fight between these powers would be like a fight between Superman and Doomsday or something, or like a nuclear war. Everything gets destroyed when the Valar fight with Melkor, and the elves only saw lights and fires in the skies and felt the shaking of ground. Um, Melkor probably had confidence in his defenses, but the might of the Valar and their wrath was more powerful than he could have imagined, because they were fighting for something. They needed to protect the children of Ilúvatar, whom they love very much. So Melkor runs and hides deep inside Utumnu. Utumnu is his fortress, fortress which is underground. It's not overground. So that's where he runs and hides. And then look at that. Finally, Tulkas gets to wrestle again and casts Melkor upon his face. And Alde the craftsman makes the chain that Melkor is bound with. So the Valar bind him and take him back to Valinor, basically. The main purpose of this fight was achieved, and Melkor was chained, and children of Ilúvatar, the Quendi, were safe, for now at least. So this was a successful. The first fight that the Valar and Melkor had, Melkor won. The Valar had to retreat, go to Land of Aman, rebuild, gain their strength. The second fight, the Valar come in force, take Melkor, bind him in chains, and then take him to Valinor. Okay, you get this one.
Nonetheless, the Valar did not discover all the mighty vaults and caverns hidden with deceit far under the fortresses of Angband and Utumno. Many evil things still lingered there, and others were dispersed and fled into the dark and roamed in the waste places of the world, awaiting a more evil hour, and Sauron they did not find. But when the battle was ended, and from the ruin of the north great clouds arose and hid the stars, the Valar drew Melkor back to Valinor, bound hand and foot, and blindfold, and he was brought to the Ring of Doom. There he lay upon his face before the feet of Manwë and sued for pardon, but his prayer was denied, and he was cast into prison in the fastness of Mandos, whence none can escape, neither Vala, nor elf, nor mortal man. Vast and strong are those halls, and they were built in the west of the land of Aman. There was Melkor doomed to abide for 3 ages long, before his cause should be tried anew, or he should plead again for pardon. Then again the Valar were gathered in council, and they were divided in debate. For some, and of those Ulmo was the chief, held that the Quendi should be left free to walk as they would in Middle-earth, and with their gifts of skill to order all the lands and heal their hurts. But the most part feared for the Quendi in the dangerous world amid the deceits of the starlit dusk, and they were filled moreover with the love of the beauty of the Elves, and desired their fellowship. At the last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers in the lights of the trees forever. And Mandos broke his silence, saying, "So it is doomed." From the summons came many woes that afterwards befell. Super
Oh
ominous.
yes. Oh yes. Many wars indeed. Um, the first part, the caverns and dungeons and vaults of Utumnu and Angband were so deep that the Valar did not think to look into all of them, or even if they tried, they were unable to. And that is how many of the servants of the enemy, including Sauron, were able to escape this wrath of the Valar. So Sauron did not get captured, and neither did most of his army of the Maiar, the Balrogs. So the Valar take Melkor back, and he is sentenced to prison in Mandos. His plea for pardon is obviously denied, but he will be given another chance to ask for pardon after 3 ages of the world. Which is, yeah, there's always a possibility of him getting a pardon if he serves his sentence, which is determined to be 3 years or 3 ages of the world. And the second thing they discussed was what to do with the Quendi. Do they just leave them? They leave them be, as Ulmo suggests, or to roam around, heal, build the world in their fashion? That seems to be the logical thing to do, but as we know, the Valar really love the children of Ilúvatar, and though the excuse is used here that they would be saving them from the dangerous world, in reality, they just really wanted to get to know them and learn about them and love them and teach them. because they came from the soul mind of Ilúvatar. They wanted the fellowship of the Quendi. Therefore, it is decided that the Valar would summon the Quendi to Valinor, so they can behold the light of the two trees of Valinor, which would be a very important thing in the coming story. Um, Mandos, as we know, is the doomsman of the Valar, and he knows much of what would happen, and he perceives all the woes that will come of this decision of the Valar, but he doesn't counsel against it, because he only says or counsels or says his doom only when Manwe asks him to, not just every time or any time he wants to. Um, for Because he does not want to change the fate of the world or what the story of the world as he has seen it. Uh, so he just simply says, so it is doomed, um, because this put in motion quite different things that could have been avoided if the Valar did not make this decision to call the Quendi to Valinor. But the elves were at first unwilling to hearken to the summons, for they had as yet seen the Valar only in their wrath as they went to war, save Orome alone, and they were filled with dread. Therefore Orome was sent again to them, and he chose from among them 3 ambassadors who should go to Valinor and speak for their people, and these were Ingve, Finve, and Elve, who afterwards were kings, and coming they were filled with awe by the glory and majesty of the Valar, and desired greatly the light and splendor of the trees. Then Orome brought them back to Cuivianen, and they spoke before their people, and counselled them to heed the summons of the Valar, and remove into the west. Then befell the first sundering of the elves, for the kindred of Ingve and the most part of the kindreds of Finve and Elve were swayed by the words of their lords, and were willing to depart and follow Orome. And these were known ever after as the Eldar, by the name that Orome gave to the elves in the beginning, in their own tongue. But many refused the summons, preferring the starlight and the wide spaces of Middle-earth to the rumour of the trees. And these are the Avari, the unwilling, and they were sundered in that time from the Eldar, and met never again until many ages were past. Ooh,
Mm. But this history is not written by the Sundered. It's written by the Eldar.
yep.
So parts of me, when I read this, I just thought it's not as scathing as I guess it could have been, but a lot of these names they're not that favorable.
Yeah, Avari is not a flattering name, I guess.
Nope. Nope.
Yeah, the unwilling. Yeah, that's true. This is written from the perspective of the is written from the perspective of the elves who did follow the summons, and
But that did not go to Valinor. Ollie, did I lose you? You do?
no, I'm here. Okay, so yeah, you're right. It is written from their perspective, from the Eldar who did go. Um, would be interesting to see what the Avari have to say about this name and everything. So Orome is sent again to to the elves, since the elves know him and trust him, but they surely had doubts about other Valar, because of all the fires in the skies and the shaking of the ground. They were afraid, so it is decided that there would be 3 ambassadors from the elves, from the 3 kindreds, who would go to Valinor and find out if the Valar are to be trusted or not. And as it was with Orome, same thing happens here as well. When they go to Valinor and see the majesty and glory of the Valar and see the light of the two trees of Valinor, they instantly were filled with awe and they trusted them as they trusted Orome when they saw him and were drawn to him. And when they come back to Cuiviénen, um, they tell their people to heed the summons and go into the west. Most of the people of Engwe and Finwë and Elwë were willing to depart with their loads to the blessed land of Aman, and it's these elves who are called Eldar ever after that point onwards. But not all the elves were on board. This Middle Earth was created for the children of Ilúvatar, and many of them did prefer staying here. They are of this world, they are children of the earth, and they love the starlight and all the places and spaces in Middle Earth, and they would rather stay here than to follow some rumor of some trees that they have never seen before. These elves would be called Avari, the unwilling, not a great name, the unwilling to heed the summons of the Valar. So we have Eldar, people of Ingwe, Finwë, Elwë, who would go to Valinor and behold the light of the two trees, and on other hand we have Avari, who would stay in Middle Earth and never see the light of the two trees. You get this one?
These were the three kindreds of the Eldali, who passing at the length of the utmost west in the days of the trees are called the Calaquendi. Sorry, I think I might have done the wrong page. Sorry. The Eldar prepared now a great march from their first homes in the east, and they were arrayed in three hosts. The smallest host and the first to set forth was led by Ingwe, the most high lord of all the elvish race. He entered into Valinor and sits at the feet of the powers, and all elves revere his name. But he came never back, nor looked again upon Middle-earth. The Vanyar were his people, and they are the fair elves, the beloved of Manwë and Varda, and few among men have spoken with them. Next came the Noldor, a name of wisdom, the people of Finwë. They are the deep elves, the friends of Aule, and they are renowned in song, for they fought and labored long and grievously in the northern lands of old. The greatest host came last, and they are named the Teleri, for they tarried on the road, and were not wholly of a mind to pass from the dusk to the light of Valinor. In water they had great delight, and those that came at last to the western shores were enamored of the sea. The sea elves, therefore, they became in the land of Aman, the Falmari, for they made music beside the breaking waves. Two lords they had, for their numbers were great, Elwë, Singolo, which signifies grey mantle, and Olwe, his brother.
Okay, here we get the three kindreds of the Eldar. They were divided into three parties, three hosts. The first and the smallest was the host of Ingwe, who is the most high lord of all elvish race. As we got in Lotro at the moment, the new race, high elf, Ingwe would be the highest of the high elves. He is the most high. He smoked the best joint. He never came back to Middle Earth, nor even looked at it again ever. And he settled with his people closest to Teniquetil, where Manwë and Varda live. And him and his people, the Vanyar, are the most fairest elves, and also the most beloved of Manwë and Varda. That's who they live just downstairs from Teniquetil. The second host are the Noldor, people of Finwë, and the Valar that they became most friendly with and admired was Aule, the craftsman, and that is why Noldor became great craftsmen. Much of the swords we see in The Hobbit or in The Lord of the Rings, they were made by the Noldor elves. The sword that Bilbo finds in the Troll Cave, the one that Thorin gets and the one that Gandalf gets, they were both made by Noldor elves. Glamdring and Orcrist both were made by the Noldor elves. Same goes for the Sting as well. The knife that Bilbo gets, that was also made by the Noldor elves. Much of the later story of the Silmarillion pretty much revolves around the Noldor elves. But just as a teaser for the most famous Noldor elf in Middle-earth would be Galadriel. She's an Noldor elf.
Okay.
And the final host are named Teleri. Teleri did depart with the two factions of Eldar, but they were not wholly on board with it and didn't want to completely abandon Middle-earth. They took really great delight in water, and they loved the calmness that Uinen had, and the music of Osse, and the storms of Osse, and the might of Ulmo. They would sing songs by the sea and were known as the Sea Elves. They had two lords, Elve and Olve. Elve is the one who was in the original party. This was Ingve, Finve, and Elve. So Elve has seen the lights of the two trees from the Teleri.
It's just interesting that they're like the largest faction, but the later books, it just doesn't seem to make much of a reference to those elves or whoever is descended from them.
Oh yeah, there's a reason for that.
Oh, okay, sorry. We're not there yet.
Oh, we're not there, and we'll know why.
Okay.
Let's say poor guys.
Oh.
Bad things happen to them.
Oh no!
Oh yeah. These were the three kindreds of the Eldali, who passing at length into the uttermost west in the days of the trees are called the Kalakwendi, elves of the light. But others of the Eldar there were who set out indeed upon the westward march, but became lost upon the long road, or turned aside, or lingered on the shores of Middle-earth. These were for the most part of the kindred of the Teleri, as is told hereafter. They dwelt by the sea, or wandered in the woods and mountains of the world. Yet their hearts were turned towards the west. Those elves the Kalakwendi call the Umaniar, since they came never to the land of Aman and the blessed realm, but Umaniar and the Avari, alike they call them Moriquendi, elves of the darkness, for they never beheld the light that was before the sun and moon. It is told that when the hosts of the Eldali departed from Cuivienen, Orome rode at their head upon Nahar, his white horse, shone with gold, and passing northward, about the Sea of Helkar, they turned towards the west. Before them great clouds hung, still black in the north above the ruins of war, and the stars in that region were hidden. Then not a few grew afraid, and repented, and turned back, and are forgotten. So the Eldar's long journey, long march begins, which would last for years, and everything in Middle-earth was still new to them. So whenever they saw something that they were filled with wonder, and again doubt entered their mind. Like, why are they leaving all these beautiful lakes and rivers and lands? Yeah. So the another name we are given here, since names, we really love names. Kalakwendi. Kwendi, as we know, were the name that they gave themselves. So Kalakwendi means the elves of the light. since they went to Valinor in the days of the trees and beheld the light of the two trees. But since we know that some of the Teleri were not wholly on board with leaving Middle-earth, so although they started the journey, some of them turned aside and some of them lingered on the shores of Middle-earth, wanting to go to the Blessed Realm, but also not wanting to leave Middle-earth. They are not quite like the elves who rejected the summons completely, the Avari, but since they never came to the land of Aman and never saw the light of the two trees, both of these elves, these elves which wandered midway, and the ones who never took the summon, they're both called Moriquendi, elves of the darkness. So Calaquendi are the Vanyar and Noldor and a small part of Teleri. Moriquendi are the Teleri who didn't leave Middle-earth or turned aside or lingered, and also Moriquendi are the Avari, the Dark Elves, who never accepted the summons of the Valar in the first place. Okay, you get the next one.
But they're not necessarily dark-hearted. They just call them the Elves of the Darkness because they haven't seen the light.
They haven't seen the light of the trees, so that's why they're called Dark Elves. I don't think they have turned to evil or anything. None of the elves have pretty much ever they have not turned to orcs, and they are not servants of Melkor. None of the elves are ever gonna be servants of Melkor.
Long and slow was the march of the Eldar into the west, for the leagues of Middle-earth were uncounted, and weary, and pathless. Nor did the Eldar desire to hasten, for they were filled with wonder at all that they saw, and by many lands and rivers they wished to abide. And though all were yet willing to wander, many feared rather their journey's end than hoped for it. Therefore, whenever Orome departed, having at times other matters to heed, they halted and went forward no more, until he returned to guide them. And it came to pass, after many years of journeying in this manner, that the Eldar took their course through a forest, and they came to a great river, wider than any they had yet seen, and beyond it were mountains whose sharp horns seemed to pierce the realm of the stars. This river, it is said, was even the river which was after called Anduin the Great, and was ever the frontier of the west lands of Middle-earth. But mere mountains were the Hithaglir, the towers of mist upon the borders of Eriador. Yet they were taller and more terrible in those days, and were reared by Melkor to hinder the riding of Orome. Now the Teleri abode long on the east bank of that river, and wished to remain there. But the Vanyar and Noldor passed over it, and Orome led them into the passes of the mountains. And when Orome was gone forward, the Teleri looked upon the shadowy heights and were afraid.
Wow. So they start their journey, it lasts for years, and they do still have doubts in their hearts, and whenever they see something beautiful or beautiful lakes and everything, they try to stop by it and spend some more time here, where they could live and be happy. River Anduin is mentioned, so that's where they have reached so far in their journey. So they started in the east of the east, beyond the misty beyond the lonely mountain, beyond the lake town. Obviously, they were not there at that time, but it's way towards the east, and they finally reached the great river now. So they just passed Mirkwood forest, and they're on their way westwards beyond Ered Luin. Vanyar and Noldor still carried on, and both factions were pretty much wanted to get to Valinor, and they had pretty much no doubt in their hearts about what they wanted. But Teleri, on the other hand, were just looking for reasons to not go on. And so that every time Orome would tend to some other matter or leave them for a few, they would stop and be afraid and not move on at all, and they will linger on, linger back. Then one arose in the host of Olwe, which was ever the hindmost on the road. Lenwe he was called. He forsook the westward march, and led away a numerous people southwards down the great river, and they passed out of knowledge of their kin, until long years were past. Those were the Nandor, and they became a people apart, unlike their kin, save that they loved water, and dwelt most beside falls and running streams. Great knowledge they had of living things, trees and herb, bird and beast, than all other elves. In after years Denethor, son of Lenwe, turned again west at last, and led a part of that people over the mountains into Beleriand ere the rising of the moon. At length the Vanyar and the Noldor came over arid Luin, the Blue Mountains, between Eriador and the westernmost land of Middle-earth, which the elves after named Beleriand, and the foremost companies passed over the vale of Sirion, and came down to the shores of Great Sea, between Drengist and the Bay of Belar. But when they beheld it, great fear came upon them, and many withdrew into the woods and highlands of Beleriand. Then Orome departed, and returned to Valinor to seek the counsel of Manwë, and left them. And the host of the Teleri passed over the misty mountains, and crossed the wide lands of Eriador, being urged on by Elve Singolo, for he was eager to return to Valinor, and the light that he had beheld. And he wished not to be sundered from the Noldor, for he had great friendship with Finwë their lord. Thus after many years the Teleri also came at last over the arid Luin into the eastern regions of Beleriand. There they halted, and dwelt a while beyond the river Gelion. Wow, there's a lot here. So here we have the first big split among the Teleri, Lenwe and numerous people who followed him. They rode southwards down the great river Anduin. These elves were called Nandor. They are not Avari, and they are not Moriquendi either, but they aren't Calaquendi either. So they are not the elves of the darkness, and they are not the elves of the light. They did accept the summon, didn't see, and they split really close to their destination, and they became a people apart. They did love the water, and they developed a great knowledge of living things and tree and herb, bird and beast. Vanyar and Noldor, on the other hand, carried on their journey, coming over arid Luin, and then coming into Beleriand, and eventually coming to the shores of the Great Sea. But after seeing the Great Sea, many of them really got afraid of this big water, and ran away into the woods and highlands of Beleriand. Because after the war, I think the waters have changed. Maybe the shores of the Great Sea were really dangerous, and they got afraid. They never seen this big water before. And Orome pretty much didn't know what to do with it, like what to do now. So he just goes back to Valinor to seek the counsel of Manwë. And that so also another thing about Nandor eventually do go to Beleriand. When after Lenwe, his son does take some of the party back to Beleriand, so that's why they are not really part of Moriquendi, because they do eventually end up in Beleriand. So, and on the other hand, Elve and his company, who were still there at near Misty Mountains on the shores of the great river Anduin, he also urges his people to march on as well, because one, he had great friendship with Finwë, the lord of the Noldor, but more importantly, he really, really wanted to behold the light of the trees of Valinor again. It wasn't a rumor to him. After seeing the light of the two trees, there's nothing else which would seem more fair to him or beautiful to him. So he was eager to return to Valinor, and finally he too comes over Ered Luin with his people into the eastern regions of Beleriand. So now all the three kindreds of the elves are in Beleriand at the moment. Um, Beleriand is, and you might be wondering where the hell is Beleriand. So Beleriand is not on the current map of the Middle Earth. The westmost part now is Ered Luin or Lindon and Thorin's Hall, right? Uh, and the Blue Mountains. The Beleriand was a whole part of the world, of an area beyond the beyond Ered Luin. So on the west side of Ered Luin, there was a whole chunk of Middle Earth, but it's not there anymore because, and you won't find it in the maps of Lotro or in the maps of the Lord of the Rings books as well. It's not there because it's not there anymore, and we'll find out why. But it is given in the maps of the Silmarillion. Maybe I'll post the maps next time so we know where the elves are at. And especially when we'll go over the geography of Beleriand. But at the moment, all three kindreds of the elves are in Beleriand, and Orome is gone to seek counsel of Manwë.
But like when they use this in the references for the game for like Balerion damage, does it mean that these are weapons that were likely created by the Noldor during that time period?
Yes, the swords of both Gandalf and Bilbo and Thorin all were made in Beleriand.
Okay. So then that's how they use these reference names. Okay.
Yeah, that's why they use the reference names. Beleriand is pretty much where a whole the story of Silmarillion will take place. It doesn't take place in anywhere else in the rest of the Middle Earth. Most of the story is gonna be in that area towards the west side of Blue Mountains, beyond Ered Luin. And that concludes our 6th session of Casual Book Club. Next week we are going to be doing chapter number 4, as I misspelled chapter, of Thingol and Melian. Thingol is another name of Elwë, by the way. So Thingol is Elwë. You can watch us. You can watch the other sessions and other videos of this series on YouTube. Link is on your screen, and it will be in the description of this video as well. You can follow and watch us gaming on Twitch, and link is there as well. And you can follow me on Twitter. Also, we are on the podcast, available on the podcast as well. I think 10 people have downloaded so far our podcast. Well, 10 people have listened to the last episode. More people have listened to the previous ones. But just search EstelPod and you'll find it. Maybe I'll find a more creative name and then we'll change it. But so far, it's EstelPod is all I had. And for any feedback or comments or anything, feel free to write to me, and so I know what you guys thought. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.